Please be seated. In my family, I am one of 4 children, 3 girls and a boy. I am the eldest, and my brother is the youngest. And I'm sure you can believe this, but there were a lot of times when we just did not get along. And there's no surprise, right? Sometimes our anger was very deep. Anger, jealousy, all those feelings. And I have some memories of some moments for which I still feel ashamed or embarrassed. But our love was stronger than our anger. Even when our relationships broke down, we would behave respectfully whenever we were in the same room. Of course, it helped that our parents had an expectation of that behavior, you know. But we were also able to do this because our love was stronger than our anger. We now live in 3 states, Alaska, Utah, and Texas. And that crosses 4 time zones, just to let you know. Because since the beginning of the pandemic, we started visiting by Zoom twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays. And each visit lasts for at least 2 hours. We talk about all kinds of things. Politics, pandemic, memories, and some very minor things I won't go into. A couple of weeks ago, my husband, because the spouses join us in this visit, my husband started making a list of all the things that we talked about. And it was like about 20 things. And it was a very funny list. So we cover a wide variety of topics, and we don't always agree on them. And when we do disagree, we just get along. Because we can work through or even just tolerate our disagreements and still enjoy each other's company because our love holds us together. In today's gospel, Jesus talked about love as the way in which those of us in a covenantal relationship with God are called to live, especially when relationships are broken. Now, if for some reason you think you may not be in that covenantal relationship with God, I want to refer you back to your baptism. And that's where we have our covenantal relationship. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. These are the formulas of love. But a word of caution here. We're not talking about relationships that are abusive and dangerous. We're not talking about those extreme relationships. So if you're being a little worried about that, please just set that aside. That's not what we're talking about. Family relationships are the classrooms in which we learn how to relate with others, how to relate with our friends, our neighbors, the students in our classroom, those who oppose us and those who support us. Jesus, as the incarnation of God, God here on earth with us, teaches us in more detail in this gospel as to how we should love one another. We're going to take a moment to talk about Joseph's family story. I love Joseph. I love his family. They're so human. We can all relate to them. Joseph was the next to the youngest of 12 brothers, and he was Jacob's favorite. He was Jacob's favorite because he was the first son by his wife Rachel, the woman he loved best and most. Now, his brothers got jealous of him, and he didn't help things because he taunted them with his favored position and the dreams that he had and things like that. And in their anger with them, they'd had enough, and they decided they were going to kill him. Just get rid of him. But fortunately, before they actually did that, there was a caravan of merchants coming along. And they said, aha, we don't have to kill him, we just have to get rid of him. So let's sell him to a merchant in this caravan. So off he went, sold as a slave to a merchant, who then sold him again to somebody else. And there's this long story of Joseph's fortunes and misfortunes. But by the time we get to this part of his story that we read today, he was part of the family of Pharaoh. He was like a father to Pharaoh, he said. And he was given all the authority to manage the food and resources for the people of Egypt to live through a 7-year famine. So he was a very powerful man. Now, this famine was not restricted to Egypt. It was for the whole region. So Jacob and his family were suffering from this famine over to the east of Egypt. And so he sent his sons to Egypt to go get some food, go get some grains and things and bring it back so that the whole household could eat. And they came, and then it gets a little complicated, but somehow or another they ended up in prison. And Joseph comes to see them. And actually it was at Joseph's order that they went to prison. And here's where we get to today's account. The meeting between Joseph and his brothers. It was a very emotional moment. Joseph told his brothers how they had no need to sell him. They had no need to feel guilt or shame about selling him, because if that did not happen, he would not have the position of authority that he has now. He would not be in a position to help them. He would not be in a position to save the family. And Joseph gave credit to God for what happened. They all cried, they reconciled. Mercy and love overcame the anguish, the shame, the anger, the embitterment that was between these siblings. And they became a reunited family. They were freed from everything that happened before. Freed from their anger, freed from their jealousy, freed from the mistreatment, everything that happened before. As Jesus said, be merciful, do not condemn, do not judge, forgive, give. For the measure you give will be the measure you give back. Jesus spoke profoundly about how, as God's people, we need to be a reflection of God's love. As disciples of God through Jesus Christ, we need to be countercultural to the society that's out there in the world. As one scholar wrote in her commentary, It is an exhortation to model a new way of living characterized by love and generosity without expecting reward. When Jesus said, "Be compassionate as your Father is also compassionate," the point is that judgment that condemns has no place in the conduct of God's people. Additionally, the academic explained that the word normally translated as forgive means in Greek to liberate. In other words, the text presents an urgent exhortation to not only stop judging and condemning, but also to give a pardon that amounts to freeing the other person. And I will add, it also gives, when that person accepts that pardon, the receiver is also liberated. This new way of living gives us liberation. The experience of Joseph and his brothers exemplifies two parts on this way of life: the willingness to love rather than condemn, and the willingness to accept love and stop being a victim. The golden rule, which we find in verse 31, says, "Do unto others as you would have them do to you." But perhaps the real point is to do to others as God would do. God sets the standard, not me, God. And how can we love as God would? Well, it's right there in our prayer book. The promises, the vows, our baptismal vows, they give us guidance. Every promise exemplifies the way of love that Jesus talked about in the gospel today. Continue being in communion with each other. Continue being in relationship with each other. The family, the church, the neighborhood, the city, the world, all those different places where you have relationships. Resist evil. Exemplify the good news. Serve Christ in all the people we encounter daily. Love our neighbor. Fight for justice and peace. Respect the dignity of every person. Our loved ones and our enemies and everybody else in between. And as we say with our baptismal vows, we can live and love like this with God's help. Amen.